Welcome, friends. We meet here at 4865A Cordell Avenue, Suite 230, Bethesda, Maryland, 20814, every Sunday for a talk and discussion thereafter. It's 11 o'clock every Sunday, and every first and third Sunday we have roundtable discussion on a particular topic. We're currently studying the Bhagavad Gita and related notes. Next week being the first Sunday of March, we will be that in the afternoon. Today's talk, The Feathered Serpent. Next Sunday, one life, one oversoul, one source. We follow the declaration of the United Lodge of Theosophists, which is on the back of our program. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification in practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, the similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without regard to race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves, by study and otherwise, to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Our reading for the day is taken from the Voice of the Silence, starting here on page 4. When waxing stronger, thy soul glides forth from her secure retreat, and breaking loose from the protecting shrine, extends her silver thread and rushes onward. When beholding her image on the waves of space, she whispers, "This is I." Declare, O disciple, that thy soul is caught in the webs of delusion. This earth, disciple, is the hall of sorrow, wherein are set along the path of desire probations, traps to ensnare thy ego by the delusion called great heresy. This earth, O ignorant disciple, is but the dismal entrance leading to the twilight that precedes the valley of true light, that light which no wind can extinguish, that light which burns without a wick or fuel. Saith the great law, in order to become the knower of all self, thou hast first of self to be the knower. To reach the knowledge of that self, thou hast to give of self to non-self, being to 9 beings, and then thou canst repose between the wings of the great bird. Sweet is rest between the wings of that which is not born nor dies, but is the own throughout eternal ages. Describe the bird of life, if thou wouldst know. Give up thy life, if thou wouldst live. And now for the base side. The feathered serpent.
Good morning and welcome, friends. There are some maps and a few illustrations on the board. For today's talk, we're actually going south. We're going to Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and these areas. And we're going to talk as to what happened in those areas prior to modern civilization. The title, as you know, is Feathered Serpent. And under the distinctively American name and symbol of the feathered serpent are to be found the great teachers of Mexico and, of course, Central America. Who has not heard of the fair god whose promise to come again led the Mexican to believe that Cortez was the returning Ket-sal? And Quetzalcoatl means feathered serpent. There may be, it says, patriot souls in that country who still look for his coming and long for the time when the feathered serpent will replace the Christian cross. Ket-sal is the name of the paradise bird, and Coatl the word for serpent. And in Maya, the equivalent is Kukulkan, and Gukumats in Quiche dialect or Popolwa. When appeared American civilization under the protection of the feather serpent is still debated and will continue to be. In HPV's time, 19th century, Augustus Plangion endeavored to prove that Egyptian civilization had its inception here in the Americas, and that it was among the Mayas and Quiches of 11,500 years ago. Now, Madame Blavatsky says that the first part of this supposition is incorrect, but the latter part is correct. In other words, Mayas were coeval with Plato's Atlantis. Now, I'll have to take this off. I hope you had a good look at it. And this shows the Usumacinta River all the way from Guatemala City to Chiapas and to the sea, which is the Gulf of Mexico up here. This is the phoenix, the bird, and this is Chocbul, which was discovered dug out in Chichen Itza. This is Mitla, Temple of the Underworld. It's been put here for the decorations. They're so precision-oriented, so old, that yet they remain intact still today. And of course, that is Montezuma. So now we will take this off so I can write on this board. Otherwise, I won't be able to do it. I'm not going to do that. show it as we go along one by one. Ket-sal. Ket-sal. It is written this way. Ket-sal. It's and pronounced Ket-sal. Ket-sal. And that's the bird, and coatl. This is the bird, and this is the serpent. So, hence the feathered serpent. So, HPB gives it 11,500 years. Mayas, she says, were coeval with Plato's Atlantis. So they're a very old civilization. So then the question becomes, where did they come from? Did they come from Atlantis? And even though a long period of residence is not assigned to them by historians, for instance, one person, Louis Spence, says that the Maya civilization did not develop on American soil, but that the people came with a full-blown culture, a mature art, architecture and religion, and a system of writing, passing from hieroglyphic into the phonetic stage. And the cradle of the race seems to have been along the headwaters of the Usumacinta River and the Rio Grande in Guatemala, in that part of the Chiapas, which slopes down from the steep Cordilleras. And we showed the Usumacinta River, which was somewhere in here. There it is, and we will just hold it up. It's right here. Here it is. This is Guatemala, and it comes all the way into Mexico and then goes to sea. So it's kind of on the border of the two countries. And one tradition refers both to an Eastern and a Western immigration. And the Eastern was under Itzamna, whose people founded, among other cities, the famous Chichen Itza, which preserves the memory of their rule. A curious reminder of Atlantis, we are told, is found in the statue of the Chocmol, the sandals upon whose feet are exact representations of those found on the feet of the Guanches of the Canary Islands. So this student looked for the feet, but I'm afraid it's not it's not very clear as to what sandal he's wearing. And here it is. And looked also on the Guanches, and their emperor or king has exactly these sandals, but they're not very visible as to its shape and what it is formulated from. And that is why this was put up there, because of the sandals. And there is a tremendous distance between the Mayan civilization in Mexico and Canary Islands next to Western Africa. It's sort of to the west of the West African coast. So how is it that this correspondence exists? So we're now talking about two immigrations. One from the east and the other one from the west. The Western immigration, it says, was under the leadership of Quetzalcoatl, and he was considered both a man and a god. And he is the first ruler of the Toltecs. As well as the Maya centers, as we shall see. And in the traditional way, the Toltecs' origin is given variously in different ways. Some identify them with the populations of Guatemala and also in Yucatan, whither the Mayas later removed, from which it has been inferred that the Mayas and the Toltecs were one people. Estelchochitl, a native chronicler, represents them as coasting down Lower California and Mexico. And we have the map, and of course the lower part of California is San Diego, Los Angeles, those areas is what we're talking about. And he says that arriving there at a place called Talapalan in 378 AD. (378 AD), and these dates come from the lodges kept chronicles. So then, from there, they turned inland and settled in the modern Tula and built Tolan, of course, from which they took their name. Tula is in central Mexico, by the way. It's on the map. And there they erected temples and palaces, the walls of which were encrusted with rare red and black stones. This is, of course, very reminiscent of Atlantean architecture, in which white, red, and black stones were decoratively combined, and that Talapalan, the traditional home of Ket-sal, the land of black and red stones, generally translated the land of writing, because the Mayas used both red and black ink, was in Atlantis. According to the son of the last king of the Quiches, the Toltecs are descendants of Israelites, who after crossing the Red Sea and separating from their companions under the guidance of a chief named Tanub, set out wandering from one continent to another, until they came at last to a place named Seven Caverns in Mexico and founded Tula. A famous Toltecan king bore the biblical appellation of Balamacan. And the first, Balaam, is Chaldean. Besides the striking similarity between the language of the Aztecs and Hebrew, many of the figures on the bas reliefs of Palenque and the idols in terracotta exhumed in Santa Cruz del Quiche have headgear similar to the phylacteries worn by the Pharisees of old and even by the Jews of Poland and Russia today, says HPV. And then adds that the time will undoubtedly come when some of the people in these countries will be traced back to the Phoenicians and the Jews. That various migrating tribes met to form a heterogeneous population prior to and after the first millennium before Christ, a reasonably assumed historical date, is without a shadow of doubt. A book in the language of Quiches of Guatemala said to have been written by Wotan, and Wotan is another name for Ket-sal. In Guatemala. was at one time in the possession of Bishop of Chiapas, who introduced portion of it into his own work. And in this book, Wotan declares that at the express command of the Lord, he came to the New World to apportion the land among 7 families which he brought with him. Leaving the land at Valum Kivim, he passed the dwelling of 13 snakes and arrived in Valum Wotan, where he founded the great city of Nawan, city of snakes, thought to be none other than Palang. From a date found on a stela at Palang, it appears to have been founded in 15 BC. So it's very old, 15 BC. But HPB tells us that that structure was put on another one that existed before it. So there was an older city at that site. It is also said that Wotan made 4 trips to the east, and on one occasion is said to have visited King Solomon, to whom he gave valuable particulars about the mysterious continent, but gave him no clue as to how he might reach it. In narrating this expedition, Wotan describes a subterranean passage which terminated at the root of heaven, adding that it was a snake's hole and that it was admitted to it because he was son of snakes. Well, there's an explanation in Isis Unveiled, Volume 1, page 545 to 54, which tells us that a snake refers to an initiate. Initiate. And look at the title, The Feathered Serpent. So upon his return then, he built a temple known for its underground chambers, and it was called the House of Darkness. And perhaps you can pronounce this word for us? Hue or Juetan? I'm not sure how.
The H is silent.
Uetan?
Maybe, yeah. That's...
Okay, this student does not speak Spanish, and I'm not quite sure how that word is pronounced. So you can make a choice. It's Uetan or I don't know. The bishop says that to this day, there's always a clan in the city of Teopasa which call themselves Wotans. And it is related that he tarried in Ueta, and that there he placed a tapir and a great treasure in a subterranean house, which he built, and appointed a woman as chieftain with tapianes to guard her. This treasure consisted of jars which were closed with covers of clay, and of a room in which the pictures of the ancient heathens were placed, engraved in stone, and they were all on the calendar, together with the Chawichutis, small green stones, and other superstitious images, and the chieftainess and the tapianes, her guardians, surrendered, it says, all these things which were publicly burned in the marketplace at Ueta when we inspected the aforesaid province in 1691. Quetzalcoatl is always represented with the nose of the tapir. It is perfectly clear that a line of Wotans, priests of Quetzalcoatl, who took his name, existed for hundreds and perhaps thousands of years. So, the legends of the feathered serpent is various and many. It is stated that he is the son of a virgin, sent into the world to save mankind. He is also connected to earthquake, deluge, and wind. The Lord of the Wind, Tonakatekuitli, when it seemed good to him, breathed and created Quetzalcoatl. He is also the son of the very old one, Sitinatonali, creator of heaven and earth and mankind, the dragon from which the earth was made when it rose out of the sea. And it seems like there is not a single cultural or social custom whose origin was not referred to Quetzalcoatl, but he is also remembered, especially so, in connection with the planet Venus, the Maya calendar, and Maya writing. According to this legend, his mission completed, he departed eastward, and on reaching the sea, put off his feather dress and the turquoise snake mask, and immolated himself upon a funeral pyre, his heart, it is stated, becoming the planet Venus. And this is mythological. A god of the morning star, he bore the calendrical name Seacatl, one of the dates marking the periodical return of Venus. Now, Dr. Spinden of Harvard states that the first definite date in the history of the New World is August 6, 613 BC, when the Mayas began to give each day its consecutive number, and that the Venus calendar was put in final working order between two risings of Venus as morning star in conjunction with the summer solstice of 538 BC and 530 BC. And he also believes that Quetzalcoatl was made god of the morning star for solving a problem in astronomy. At all events, the Maya adepts were astronomers, and the round towers, it is stated, are probably their observatories. In the Dresden Codex, there are fragments of Maya writing which survived the Inquisition, and this is one of them. It is in Germany, obviously, in Dresden. The Dresden Codex are computations involving about 34,000 years, and also 405 revolutions of the moon is set down. So the writing was supposed to be a joint production of Quetzalcoatl and also to other gods. And the suggestion with a question mark is, can we suppose it was Atlantean? Bishop Landa, of course, destroyed all of the manuscripts. But at the end, after destroying them, he decided he was going to write something down of their language, and he contacted scribes. But about 1/3 of those hieroglyphics, it is stated, were deciphered with the help of the books of Chilan Balam, transcripts of more ancient works in the Maya tongue, but they are in Spanish characters made by some of the educated natives after the conquest. The original, in other words, do not exist. So also, Quetzalcoatl carried a wand resembling the rod of Moses, by which the latter lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, and representations of the lifting up of serpents occur in Mexican paintings. To his care was also confided the holy envelope, concealing the divinity from human gaze, from which he alone received the instructions for the guidance of his people. So then the reign of Quetzalcoatl was the golden age of Toltecs. It is stated that maize was plentiful and cotton grew in all colors. It did not need to be dyed. We only have white, but at that time they had colored cotton. But this estate did not last, and it is stated that Quetzalcoatl excited the envy of Tezcatlipoca, who presented himself as a physician and gave a beverage that would restore the monarch's health and prepare him for the long journey that was decreed to him by fate. So then the departure of Quetzalcoatl marks the downfall of Toltecs before the rising tide of the warlike Aztecs. But it was also hastened by practice of human sacrifice. So Quetzalcoatl tried to curb that tendency, suggesting sacrificing flowers, leaves, and themselves, but fruit, it did not take hold. And there is a statement by Sir James Fraser that the physical vigor of the ancient kings was thought to depend for the success of the community in agriculture, and the failure of the crop implied that the impotent monarch was to be sacrificed or rejuvenated. So there is a statement by Tezcatlipoca that Quetzalcoatl was going to meet another old man in Tilan Talapalan, and that they were going to speak together, and when they returned, they were going to be youthful, perhaps a boy. So it is obvious from these statements that the adepts of Quetzalcoatl made periodical journeys to the east and were in touch with the Great Lodge. The statement about the Aztecs is that they were latecomers to Mexico, arriving there about 8th century of our era, but they did not settle in the plateau of Mexico until the 13th century, when they founded Tenochtitlan, the site of the present Mexican capital. And they had many traditions, and they made the statements that they dwelled on a great water in a region called Atlan, and of coming there in 4 tribes. The Mexican pantheon of 13 gods, the chief of which is Tezcatlipoca, corresponding to Jupiter, worshipped by all the Nahua Mexican tribes. And his special symbol was a fiery mirror in which he saw all that occurred on earth. And one of his functions was to distribute reward and punishment. He's also shown with a bandaged eyes. His eyes are bandaged. Huitzilopochtli was the god of war, whom his mother conceived from a ball of down, which fell from heaven upon her bosom. Of course, mythological. She was the great earth goddess whose skirt was woven of serpents, indicated by her name Quetzalcoatl. Tlaloc was the god of rain. To him, in periods of drought, were sacrificed the most beautiful maidens in the city of the Sacred Well, discovered by Edward Thompson. And of course, as we all know, he eventually bought a tract of land, including that well, and settled in Chichen Itza. And the article suggests that perhaps we do go to places that, when we reincarnate, that memories are still there. The Lord of Fire, of exceedingly ancient origin, was the fire existing even before the sun or moon. He dwelt in the navel of the earth, where volcanic fires have their origin, and also above in a kind of cloud castle. He is called He who entereth the blue stone of the pyramid. So then the ancient god, the father and mother of all gods, runs an Aztec prayer, is the god of fire, which is in the center of the court with 4 walls, and which is covered with gleaming feathers like unto wings. In the great temple of Mexico City, the inextinguishable fire was kept burning at the time of the conquest. It is said that when all was dark, Tezcatlipoca transformed himself into the sun so as to give light to men. After the destruction of the sun, Quetzalcoatl became the second sun, Tlaloc the third, and Quetzalcoatl's wife the fourth. The present sun is called Tonatiuh, which is destined to conclude with an earthquake, according to this statement. Once created, the sun had to have nourishment, and various gods sacrificed themselves so that he might obtain sustenance. Human sacrifice, of course, is not acceptable. It's very crude even for that time, but for them it has a symbolical meaning, which was transformed to support the sun god. Of course, it's perverted. So at that time, when the conquest occurred, a lot of human sacrifices took place, and but for them, death by sacrifice was considered a normal ending to a warrior's life, and provided them to enter the paradise of the sun. So the recurring periods of Venus were connected with the return of the reincarnating egos. This planet, like the Egyptian Osiris, is also represented by a mummy, and it represents a kind of feast for all souls where people dance around. Now we're talking about regeneration here. Here's the phoenix. And why is it a feathered serpent? What does the phoenix represent? Obviously, it represents regeneration because it burns itself and then comes out of the fire as a youth. So the phoenix, regeneration. What happens to the human soul? Do not we come back? Or do not we reincarnate? That is regeneration. Considering that it's not the physical body we're talking about here, we're talking about our higher aspects. Atma, Buddhi, Manas, let me put it here. The spirit, the spiritual soul, mind. And this is what reincarnates from life to life. So then the bird part of it represents just that regeneration. But in mythological character of the phoenix, it is given an approximate lifespan of 500 years. It also represents the sun. It represents consecration, resurrection, paradise, metempsychosis. So Quetzalcoatl is this representation. Both the bird and the serpent is combined to make that name. Now, in the Mexican Kamaloka, it's Mitlan, which is the Kamaloka. It is the home of Mitlanticuli, and it has 9 spheres, and above it there are 13 heavens. Tlalocan was the Mexican Devacan, apparently one of the 13 divisions, and the dead enjoyed a temporary bliss there. And in their interpretation, the old aged ones had to face a 4-year journey before reaching the river of Hades, and to swim across, it is stated that a red dog was needed. This is a student that did not find any reference to a red dog and do not know what it stands for. Children were admitted to a special paradise where they flitted from one flower to another, and the Codex Vaticanus A bears such a close resemblance to the Egyptian Pertum Rule that it has been called the Mexican Book of the Dead. And in its pages, the corpse is depicted as dressed for burial, the soul, like the Egyptian Ba, escaping from the mouth. The deceased is ushered into the presence of Tezcatlipoca by a priest in an oslet skin, and that's oslet is like a big cat. It can be beige with black dots. Just as the Egyptian was brought before Osiris and stands naked with a wooden yoke about his neck to receive judgment, and then he has to undergo the test that precedes entrance to the abode of the dead. The Mexicans had a perfect calendar system, but instead of adding 1 day in 4 years as we do, they added 13 days every 52 years. So every 52 years, they added 13 days to their calendar. And they had a perfect calendar, by the way. So at midnight of the closing cycle, it is stated, determined by the observation of the Pleiades, the high priest kindled a new fire, and this representation surrounding the cities came to that fire and lit their torches and took it back to their own temples in their own city. And from the temples then the homes were lighted. At this ceremony, the old garments were torn, the household utensils were broken, and a general rejoicing took place, because the memory of a cataclysm in the memory of these people were very actual, and they were very glad that the world destruction did not take place at the end of the 52 years. So the flood legend, Tezcatlipoca warned of that to Nata and his wife Nana, that a deluge was approaching, and told them to hollow a cypress tree and enter it. It says that that year was that of Sekali, and of the first day all was lost. And we know that Atlantis, or the last island of Atlantis, submerged 11,500 years ago. So then the American pyramids are terraced mounds of earth, and they are cased in stone or cement. This is a substructure, and the temple is placed on the top, and there is a stairway, or more than one sometimes, on its sides. The chief pyramids were to sun and moon, and also in recognition of other planets and of Pleiades, which is stated that took a reference point for destruction of Atlantis. So then the sun pyramid is very similar in arrangement to the Great Pyramid of Cheops. The seventh terraced pyramid at Papatlan has 3 stairways leading to the top, and these are decorated with hieroglyphic sculptures and 318 small niches. And we know that 813 is the number of servants of Abraham, but it is also hinted that 318 is the Gnostic number of Christ. And we did show the temple at Mitla with beautiful subterranean chambers, and it is stated that these were still in use in the 19th and 20th centuries, but this student does not know if they are still in use, but the article suggests that they are still used. And when Dr. Spinden and Gregory Mason went there on an exhibition, they asked permission from the Mexican general to see certain sites. And the Mexican general told them that it was not permissible because these were still in use. Now, HPP has an article about a phantom city. Perhaps you have all read it. It's very interesting. You know that she traveled to these places, right? So she wrote this after a priest approached and told her that as a young man he had climbed up some 10 or 12,000 feet where he overlooked a plain extending towards Yucatan and Gulf of Mexico. And there, he says, he saw a great city with turrets, white and glittering in the sun. And these people still speak the Maya language, and the priest said they will murder any white man who tries to enter their territory. So perhaps the article says perhaps a messenger goes between this city and other locations, reminding people of their ancient faith, and they have their secret meetings and still perform simple rites by which the power of the sun and of Montezuma is recognized, as well as the power of the feathered serpent. And we are told that Montezuma told them that this is what they have to look for life. So we will stop here and answer any questions you might have. Perhaps I should also say that we referred to Zamna. He is one of the upper gods. He rules heaven day and night. And Lewis Spence is a Scottish journalist, author, and occult scholar, and he wrote a lot of books on Atlantis and occult subjects.
Are the Maya direct descendants of the Atlanteans, or did they receive visitors from the last survivors of the Atlantis?
According to these writings, they are remnant of Atlanteans, because when the land started sinking, the portion that was saved from the sinking land had to find themselves areas to relocate to. And according to this writing, it is said that there was a west and there was an eastern immigration. Remember, Atlantis was a very large piece of land in the Atlantic, but when it started sinking, portions of it became islands. And of course there were other islands in the ocean. And actually, the Secret Doctrine 2 gives pathways as to how you could come all the way from Atlantis to Americas. She actually makes a route for us to follow. I did not have time for this research to also bring that forth, but it's in Secret Doctrine number 2. So, the suggestion is that Mayans are coeval with Plato's Atlantis, meaning that that last portion sank 11,500 years, and this emigration took place at that time. In our different populations settled in different areas, but they brought with them their culture. In other words, they were not ignorant peoples. They had a culture, they had writing. If you look at the buildings, there are such a perfection in proportion, and they have been there for a very long time, and they still remain intact. Egyptian pyramids and the pyramids here are similar to one another.
Why do you think they kept that part of their origins occult, or?
Well, the if you want to call Ket-sal, their leader, we said he's as a man as well as a god. Obviously, he was initiated into the mysteries, and he had tremendous knowledge. How does one judge a higher god? This student does not know. We talk about it, but what does that really mean in its inner meaning? What does it mean to be a perfected being? I have an idea, but when they become leaders of their people, they assume that sacrificial role to lead these people to safety, to establish a social order with values that mean something to the people, because they bring it with them, obviously. They're not uneducated in the sense that they have a civilization from where they came from. Atlantis was far superior to where we are today, according to the writings.
Yeah, but except that one thing about the human sacrifice that you mentioned, why did they go that route?
Well, it was perverted when they came here, because they wanted to sustain the sun god, and so they started sacrificing what they captured during their fights. That's what they sacrificed to the gods. So this article says that that was an excuse to go to war so that they wouldn't kill their own people, but they would capture people and sacrifice it to the sun god. And it is extremely perverted.
Yeah. Also the origin of their names for gods, goddesses, and locations, regions with the TL that comes from Atlantis. Is that something?
Yeah, it says
is that a weak point to say that, okay, they are Atlanteans, or is it supportive of the theory?
There's a lot of controversy out there. Atlantis, everyone does not accept this philosophy. You have to remember that when we say it, there are two books right there on the shelf, Donnelly and another one. They wrote about it and proved that such a land existed, and the secret doctrine confirms it by showing us where the land pieces are and how we can join them together to bring it to the surface where Atlantis was. Yes?
It said that these pieces of land were really one mass before the Atlantic Ocean separated Africa and South America, and probably other masses of land in the world as we know it now.
That is true, but that's not what we are talking about here. We're talking about the fourth race, Atlantean race, and it is stated in these writings that Atlanteans had become so wicked as a result of materialization that they had divided into two groups. One group following the material side, and the other not forgetting their spiritual side. They understood that they had to go through the material immersion, but that was their function to uplift everything spiritually. They did not give into material life. So at that time, HPV says, we were all one until we divided into two. And from that point on, this division carries forward. When you look around, our society is divided. One lot believes in something and the other lot believes in something else. One lot is for the unity and sacrifice for all, accepting that human beings and all of nature for that matter is one, that there is no separation amongst anything, and that we need to think at this stage of our development, she says, we should have already gone through all of the material experiences, because we have gone through them. We don't have to get kind of stuck in it, which is what has happened. People either go towards skepticism because they cannot accept the dogma, and the other lot accept scientific proposals as facts. Not so. Many places we are reminded that the scientific world of the West only experiments with the physical side of nature. We are 7 principles. The East have all of the principles at their leisure to benefit from, but not so the West. We are so materialistic, our science represents that today. So it's very selfish and self-centered in a sense, and look what is happening to our world. Pharmaceuticals, companies trying to make billions of dollars, people wanting to get rich, more is better. Not so. What happened to the quality of life? What happened to us? Every individual must think about these issues and make some kind of decision making for themselves and not accept authority on any account. We are enlightened human beings. Our minds are open. We're intelligent human beings. We each can make our own decisions about what kind of life we want to live.
You talked about the East and the West and all sovereign elements in the East. In the West, we are virtually materialistic. But in the East, they said the superstition of the East.
Yeah.
So these two concepts need to both be overcome.
Yes. Yes. East has superstition. At the time when HPB came, she came to the Western world because it was even more difficult to pierce the superstition of the East at that time. To this day, that still exists. Superstition still exists, and their society is also divided. Caste system was not meant to be what they have made. Brahmins made something different of the caste system. Buddha came to get rid of it. They got rid of Buddha instead. It's not taught in India there. They got rid of Buddha. Buddhist religion went south, Ceylon, Burma, but not in India. There are Hindus. Buddha himself was a Hindu. He didn't change anything. He wanted to give the philosophy to all, and that is what the objection was. That is exactly the same objection HPB faced in the 19th century. Everyone would not go along with it. So until a next impulse is given, and 1975 did not see that impulse. They have their agents in the world, but no one came externally into the world. They are now saying that each human being has to become a center unto itself. We know how to make decisions. And we have to deserve it too. Our actions and our collective thinking and mode of life has to show that we are ready for it. Why would they give us more when we haven't absorbed this lot here? What would be the purpose?
The idea of human sacrifices, also, we find that in the Middle East, in that area too, right? Because it shows up in the Bible.
The student is not aware of it and cannot make any comments whatsoever. I don't know what's in the Bible.
That's carried forth, I guess, the idea of sacrifices, we see that in the Gita too.
Yeah, but it's a flower,
a fruit, water. But the real sacrifice is yourself.
Correct. Yeah, yourself.
This is just symbolic here.
Yeah, symbolic, but nevertheless, it's not. Each human soul has the same value as the other human souls. So we cannot judge which one of us should be sacrificed by cutting our head.
Well, I'm talking about the sacrifice of yourself when you're here. You're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing when you sacrifice all your time and effort to a noble cause, which is higher than yourself.
Yes, but in some countries that beheading still occurs, or they cut your arm or your leg. It's totally wrong. It is perverted. No leader of a human race has come to Earth for that kind of grotesque guidance. nowhere is it stated. It's the followers that adjust to their own thinking what they want to do with what is given, and this is the danger to all of us.
You spoke of the Phantom City, a place that no one could enter. You said something of the sort. Yeah, there's also a legend of El Dorado in South America. I didn't know where it was, but I have heard of it. And at National Geographic it says it's a city of immense wealth that people kept looking, but they changed geographical locations. They never found it.
Well, if they wanted to be found, I guarantee you they would let us know. It is essential that they not be found. They don't want to be found.
Yeah.
And this story HBB narrated to us was confirmed to her by more than one person. She has quite a few articles actually about South America. One of them is about the wealth that is underground. And one person found the entrance to this passageway and went in and came out with it, but died very shortly thereafter, lost reasoning power. And others went in, they never came out. So the entrance have now been totally blocked. The representatives of the government blocked it, so that people don't go in and not come out, because who knows what's under there. I mean, if they wanted it to be found, they would have enabled people to find it. You know, elementals don't allow it because they are guarding it. It will not happen. She talks about the same thing for Egypt, that it's underwater, and her students kept asking her, how can underwater anything survive? And she said, well, there are processes that are used for sealing that does not allow water to get in. We don't know anything about it, but look at the mummies, for instance. How long had they been preserved? So yes, those older generations, the ancient peoples, were wiser. They knew how to use their resources better, and they had knowledge as well that they used. The ones that had it used it wisely. Okay, thank you for coming, and please join us next week. One self, one oversoul, one source. Thank you.
Thank you.